Do you find it difficult juggling parenting with a creative business? I know that for me, one of the greatest challenges is managing being a mother with being an artist. I went to speak to artist Jade Moon, and this is exactly what we talked about, as well as talking about her magical, mystical work. I'm artist Sarah Vaci, and you're watching How to Be Creative and Stay Positive at the End of the World. Tell me a bit about your mystical, magical work, because I really don't know much about it.
Sure. I'm a totem and talisman maker. I make magical objects, which is sometimes jewellery or altar objects, things that people use for magical practices.
Wow, and how did you get started with this kind of work?
I think I've always been making jewellery. Ever since I was little, I used to take broken bits of jewellery and take them apart and make new things. But there was a moment when I had my son, actually, where, because I was also a poet and a storyteller, and I had this kind of divide between, should I do this storytelling and this poetry that doesn't produce any objects in the world, or I had this other fascination with textures and colours and old things that seem to have old stories, and I was always fascinated with that. But after I had my son, breastfeeding takes part of your brain away. There's no doubt about that. I felt like my brain was coming out of my breasts. So I kind of lost the ability to memorise. So I got moved away from the poetry and the storytelling and more engrossed in making physical objects. But I thought to myself, if I'm going to make physical objects, I don't want to make just throwaway pieces of jewellery that are fashionable for a bit and then go out of fashion. So I started wanting to make what might be an heirloom, what might be really precious. And as I said, I'd always had a fascination with old objects that had story. And so I began listening more and more to the objects around me. And I learned a new word actually the other day. There was a word megin, which is an Old Norse word meaning the life of things, the life of objects, and the life of people. Quite often in archaeological finds you find things that are broken, and the idea is that they release the megin in something and give it as an offering to the gods.
Wow.
So my pieces that I'm making are to contain spiritual essence. So that's the way that I'm working, and that was the moment came when I had just had my son. I realised I couldn't memorise anymore. I realised I couldn't go on stage, I couldn't perform because I was all, I don't want to go on stage, I feel very self-conscious. So yeah, I got really engrossed in making things.
And how do you put the megin into your pieces?
Everything has megin, especially bones and objects that have been treasured by people. But every object has megin. I quite often think that plastic doesn't have any for some reason, which is why I don't really like it all that much. But you know, a bone has lived inside the body of an animal and lived the life of that animal. So it has a story, you know, and every object has a story. But what I work with is weaving things together. And there are ways magically of working with things where you can enhance that.
Oh, okay. So it's a secret.
No, it's not a secret. I mean, it's just that every single thing that I work with in a different way, and it's quite intuitive.
Oh, right. Okay.
So, for example, I bought a snake skin, and I knew that the snake had been killed for its skin. So I put the snake skin under my altar for about a month, and then I took it out. I began treating the skin because it had to be moisturised anyway because it was old leather, and talking to it and saying, I'm sorry you died in the way that you died, and then put it back under my altar again, and then I took it out again about a month later again, re-moisturised it, and then I danced with it. So once I'd allowed the spirit of the animal to go to sleep and to leave, and all the kind of negative energy connected to it to go away, then I danced with it to bring the spirit of snake back into it.
And then were you, through that, waiting for some inspiration of working out what you might actually do with it?
Yeah.
So you don't have a preconceived idea, oh, I'm going to go and order a snake skin because I want to make this thing. You wait for it to kind of speak to you?
Absolutely. There's a lot of listening in my work, yeah. I definitely wait for things to tell me what they are.
Have you worked out what you're going to do with it yet, or still?
I've already made some snakeskin bags.
Okay.
And there are more things coming, but again, I just wait and see what what things want to become. I think my favourite kinds of commissions are when people are asking me to make something for a rite of passage. I've had some very profound tasks offered to me. So, for example, a woman asked me to make a totem of a wolf for her because she had a vision of meeting a wolf after having met all her ancestors, and her grandmother died, and from her grandmother she had a little piece of her grandmother's hair. So when I fired the piece, she asked me to put the grandmother's hair on it and a bit of her own hair, so that when I fired the piece, the spirit of her grandmother went into the piece. On a more sad level, I was asked quite recently to make a piece for a woman whose baby died after 23 hours of living. And it was the totem is of a woman holding a baby, for her to remember her baby past, but also to give her hope for another baby, so as a fertility object as well.
So would you meet these people, or is it mostly online, like people messaging you, or do you speak on the phone? Or
it depends how far away people are. And also recently I was asked to make what this woman termed a magical key, which means it's not physically actually a key, it's a little pouch. And she said to me, I have this problem and I don't know how to solve it, but I feel like I'd like a magical symbolic object to help me with it. So she told me a little bit about the problem, and then I did a bone reading for her, which means that I threw the bones to find out more about what her issue was, and then I had an interaction with her backwards and forwards about what the bones were saying and how she felt about it, and therefore what objects would be in the pouch to symbolise the things that she was struggling with and how she might overcome them. And I've had some very positive feedback from her about that. So that's always really good when I make something and, you know, it does what people want it to do. But as much as that comes from the person themselves as it does from me, it's a kind of two-way exchange, really.
But you're at a very exciting stage at the moment where you're just setting up your Patreon.
Yes. The Patreon's taken quite a long time. That's quite time-consuming, but also, in a way, there's pricing things and the obvious kind of problems that people have with, you know, when you're an artist and you create, and there's something more. It's not just art that I'm doing, it's also offering a kind of a service in a way, a kind of wise woman service, if you like. But I think one of the problems that I sometimes come across is being focused, as like moving between being a mother and being a creative person, and having to have something that helps me get straight back into being an artist after, you know, 5 days of having my son here and totally focusing on him. I mean, I read a book recently called The Divided Heart, which is about artists and mothers.
Oh, I should read that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's a whole load of essays and interviews from women artists who've either had children in the middle of their career or you know, before they even really began, and how to stay, because it takes, both of the things take all of your being, don't they? To be completely focused on your art takes all of your being, and to be a mother takes all of your being as well. So
I do find it hard to go from wiping bottoms and cooking pasta to suddenly making a sculpture.
Exactly.
Although there could be some links with the whole clay. Sorry, that's modelling materials. Am I going a bit? That's just how my brain works. But are you
still on the fecal stage of development?
Well, do you have? No, I don't actually use that in my modelling.
Good, that's reassuring.
But you know, brown
you have washed your hands, haven't you?
Yes. But do you? I don't know what the book says, but do you have any kind of small ritual that you think, right? That little phase for the day is done, and now I move into the next, like the creating phase. So do you have a sort of ritual or some way of making that transition?
That's exactly what I have, yeah. I mean, just having a separate space in the house that's completely my own, walking through the door, is the first part of the ritual, isn't it? And I have an altar at which I light candles and I drum to just get into a different kind of headspace. The moving from artist to mummy is I mean, it literally means just getting on the bus and going and picking up my son. And then there's the buffer zone where sometimes I'll be in a complete dream world talking to the mummies like yourself outside the school gates, just thinking, I've been in my studio for hours, you know, and it's just part of it. And my son's
You can always tell me that. Say, Sarah, I'm in the zone. I can't talk about the school play.
Yes,
or whatever it is.
But my son's also used to it. He's used to having artist parents. And
do you ever feel frustrated? Because sometimes I do feel like I don't have that much of a balance, and I'd rather do more creating. So the way I'm trying to reconcile that is to be creative alongside my children a bit more, so that I don't sit there feeling frustrated, but I say, come on, let's all get some oil paints out because I really need to do that right now. And they're normally willing, so that's great. It's just if I want to do something a bit more technical that they can't be involved with, and I know that I have to go through all the evening kind of supper and bedtime, and I'm waiting, and it's something that I'm finding really difficult to accept, especially being the woman. It's expected that you're going to do more of the caring. So I'm really interested to read that book.
Yes.
And tell me a bit about the techniques that you use, because I know you talk about kiln, and I know you use special kind of metal clay or something.
Yeah, so I use precious metal clay, which is basically a clay that once it is fired, which at the moment I fire with a blowtorch, but I hope to get a kiln soon. It's basically tiny particles of metal that once the organic binder has burnt off, which is quite dramatic, sort of flames. You feel like a real alchemist doing that, and then the metal particles sinter together, so they go melty and sinter together, so it shrinks a tiny little bit. But basically it's sculpting. I'm sculpting very, very small, and then all the other bits that I work with are second-hand beads. Again, I don't buy things. I do buy things, but I don't buy things first-hand because of the ethical considerations of taking stones out of the earth.
Are you thinking of making, so everything you make at the moment is jewellery, or is it sometimes figurines, or a sort of a range?
So I make the little pouches.
And also the...
these dream catchery tree. I call this a wisdom tree.
Is this a stone, or what is that?
This is carved antler.
Oh, right. Did you carve it then?
My son's dad carved that bit.
Uh-huh.
And this is a mould taken from a beaver skull. Those are the teeth of a beaver skull. I took the mould and then I made it in precious metal clay, and then this tiny bit here is textured with a mould that I took from a rock on a sacred site in Tunbridge Wells, because that's another thing that I do. I go to sacred sites and take moulds from the rocks and the trees, and then bring the moulds back here and then make textured pieces from the sacred sites.
So stunning.
So I make medicine bowls and sometimes just objects made out of bones. I had a shamanic worker ask me to make something particularly out of a sacral bone, because it's supposed to be one of the places where the soul resides after death. So its magical uses in rebirth magic. I would say 50% of my work is commissions. I have a lot of commissions, but I like to keep it half, so I'm in my own creativity. Otherwise I start to get stilted in my creativity. So that's actually been a bit of a challenge. I've had a lot of commissions, but getting the balance between doing commissions and doing what I'm inspired to do, that's been a learning curve, how to balance those two things.
I used to kind of reward myself, so I'd be like, right, if you finish this portrait, or if you do 1 hour of this portrait, and then I'll let you, this is me talking to myself, I'll let you do 10 minutes of playing with that new clay that you've bought, or something like that. And then I've got a little, this is my whole attitude to everything is like, when I was studying for exams, I'd be like, every time you do 10 minutes, you can have a Butterkiss popcorn. That was like my little reward. Or,
lovely.
If you do half an hour of tidying your room, then you get to make a coffee, or whatever. It's just been my way that I think I need to have like a little reward. If there's something on my plate I don't really want to eat, and something I really do, I'll eat the stuff I don't want to eat first, and then I'll have the nice tasty bit as a reward.
You're mummying yourself.
Something like that. But in terms of commissions, that's worked for me really well, because then it sort of motivates you to get on with. It doesn't mean that you don't want to do the commission, but then you might have this like little fun thing to look forward to at the end.
I also have one evening a week where I have an evening for my own magical practice, because otherwise my magical work turns into work, and that can just make it all go a bit funny as well. Just in answer to your question earlier about, you know, whether I feel like I have enough time, I'm really lucky because I'm in my studio every single day of the week. The minute I drop my son off at school, I rush back here and I get on with my work, and then I rush out again. My friends say to me, oh, you really focus, you know, you don't get distracted, but I don't want to be distracted. I want to be in my studio, I want to be doing my work, because it matters that much to me to be doing it. It's my living as well, so.
I'm a bit like, I should do the dishes, and I can't wait
I ignore the dishes, I ignore the hoovering, all of it.
I can't wait to have a studio outside my flat. I think that is gonna, I've had a studio outside the house before, and that made such a huge difference, because it's also, it feels more professional to be like, I'm going to the studio, you shut the door, whether that's in your house or elsewhere, it's just, there's the studio. I mean, at home we have a studio that's now a bit of a living room, and if I said to the kids, like, that is now mummy's studio, you cannot go in, suddenly it's like, she's gone in, she can't be disturbed, or whatever exactly, it is.
Yeah.
And
I have a bolt on my door.
Now there's an idea.
It's on the outside, meaning that no one can come in here when I'm not in here. But no one comes in when I'm.
Or they could just lock you in and you have to make art forever, or something like that.
That sounds fun.
But well, I can't wait to see a bit more of some of your techniques. Hopefully, you can show me some of them.
Yeah.
In some way, and thank you very much for talking to me.
No problems.
I thought it was so interesting to hear that Jade has a ritual to go from mummy mode to enter that creative headspace. And I'd love to know if any of you do the same, so please put them down in comments. I'm artist Sarah Vaci, and you've been watching How to Be Creative and Stay Positive at the End of the World, where I've been going out and about interviewing other creative people about challenges that we all face. Don't forget to subscribe to stay tuned for the next interview. I thought it was so interesting to hear that... Stop it. Let me focus. Stop looking at me.